People who serve and protect our lives, like CFS volunteers, ambulance volunteers, the children in our communities, they go to our local schools and join our local sporting clubs. They attend and spend time and money at local community events such as the Gawler Fringe, the Carols by Candlelight, the Gawler Show, the Rotary Fair and the Australia Day Breakfast, just to name a few. Neighbourhoods are filled with retirees, elderly citizens that volunteer in our local aged care facilities such as elder care. Employment zones bring big companies that come, that take, and they don't leave much behind. I see little come back to the communities from the big companies, and I can vouch for that because I'm often out there asking for donations and I get very little for what we ask. Please say no to the rezoning of our neighbourhood. It must stay a neighbourhood zone. This will allow our community to grow and our neighbourhood to thrive. This is the Gawler I want to live in and the Gawler I'm so proud to be a part of. Please vote no.
Pat Davis, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you to Mayor Redman and councillors for giving me the
If
opportunity.
you can just talk into the microphone so that everyone can hear you, awesome work. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you to Mayor Redman and councillors for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. On the 23rd of January this year, Future Urban sent out letters to a limited number of households in the immediate vicinity of the Vidoulas site, informing the households of the proposed rezoning and potential development. This was the first we knew of the proposal, and so began a sharp learning curve. As a community, we have come together to express our opposition by means of speaking here at council and making submissions to Future Urban. We have had to read and decipher vast amounts of technical and legal information that is unfamiliar to us. I liken it to learning a foreign language. Therefore, as we are so opposed to this rezoning and so invested in this issue, we have had to learn this new language. According to Future Urban, a total of 184 submissions were received, but Future Urban chose not to include the 462 signatures that were attached to one submission opposing the rezoning. Of those submissions that Future Urban acknowledged, 68% were opposed, 29% were for, and 3% were neutral. If the 462 opposing signatures had been counted, as they should have been, 87.2% were in opposition, 11.8% were for, and 0.9% were neutral. Whereas the Future Urban community consultation has been extremely limited, I am thankful the upcoming Gawler Council engagement process will be far more wide-reaching. It is very, very important that Gawler Council listen to our concerns and act on what the people of Gawler have to say and not be influenced by outsiders or big businesses who are not part of our community. In finishing, we believe the said proposed development is in the wrong place and the rezoning of this land should not happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben Fitzsimons and Nick Emmett, thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to speak this evening. As you're aware, we've been on this journey for almost 2 years. We have engaged with council over that time, and I think what is missed in terms of a lot of the discussion is that we have followed the rules. We don't make the rules, but we have followed them. We have done what is set out in a proponent-led code amendment. From my perspective, I don't particularly like the rules either, but we have stuck to them. We've not sought to lobby people. We've not sought to do the wrong thing. We've sought to follow the process. We've engaged experts. Those experts have determined that what we are proposing is appropriate. Our expert reports have been vetted by council's independent experts and they concur. Your own staff that you employ concur that this is an appropriate land use. Let's not forget it's a 4-hectare site located on a major arterial road. 150 odd metres to the south is a centre, and pretty much extending from the subject land through to the town centre is continuous commercial development. Whilst I respect the opinions of others, from a town planning sense and a purist sense, this land is appropriate for a rezoning. A good portion of the site, all of the Main North Road frontage in effect, has been used for commercial uses for 50 years. We are seeking to have the code amended to reflect not only the existing land use, but also to get the full potential of the site. Obviously, as you would be well aware, the Gawler area has a significant amount of residential land. What it doesn't have is any readily available commercial land or employment land on a major arterial road. This site solves that problem. This site, if developed and if the code amendment goes through, will create jobs for the town. Let's not forget that there are thousands of allotments, 12,000 allotments, obviously planned up the hill in Concordia, but no employment generating activities in the town centre. You need to strike the right balance between growth and creating employment opportunities for the community within the town. We're told by our experts that some 200 full-time jobs, 175 to 200 full-time jobs will be created if this land is rezoned and developed. I believe that there would be in the order of 80 to 100 jobs created through the construction period. This proposal isn't bad. It is progress. You can't have the growth that Gawler is experiencing without rezoning other land to more appropriate uses. We say that this is appropriate. It's on an arterial road, as I mentioned before, and it is close to the centre of Gawler. The last thing that you want to do is have a whole patchwork of land uses all through the community, or lose these employment generating opportunities to other councils. Whilst I accept that there are impacts, we are mitigating those impacts. We have committed to a 3-metre landscape buffer before our acoustic barrier. We will invest millions of dollars into upgrading your infrastructure, council infrastructure, but also DIT roads. We have worked collaboratively with council, but might I say we've been pushed, and we've been pushed to a position beyond what we had anticipated. However, we reluctantly accept this position because we believe that the development is appropriate. As I said at the outset, look, we don't all like the process. That's the same for us. But there is a process, and there is a process to be run. Council have the opportunity to be a part of that process, and I'd encourage you to be a part of that process, as opposed to losing your capacity for extracting the value that you can get out of us should this proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin Simmons, thank you. Oh, well, you had a collaborative deputation. Do you want to have a separate deputation?
The request was for separate. I will be brief.
Okay,
That's
no worries. Thank you.
Thank you for your generosity.
Thank you, Ben. I don't have anything to do with the live stream. That is a staff responsibility. It's working. Apparently it's working, John. Okay. Thank you, John, for reminding us. Ben?
Thank you for the opportunity. I can only reiterate the words of my partner in this project, Nick, as to the validity and the worthiness of the consideration. One of the things I wanted to remind council of this particular land, and indeed the people sitting here, they are, if they're nearby residents, they are actually residing in a floodplain. And this site is critical to the council's overarching plan to deal with flooding, retention, detention, moving off site. And we've worked almost exclusively for the last 2 years coming up with a formula and a plan on the belief that we would be owning the land to do so, to implement that plan. And this is not to be a threat or anything like that, but I think you would be hard pressed, honestly hard pressed, to find other people to work with the council as we have to get a overarching result for the community, for the benefit of the community, utilising this site to solve those flooding issues that are present in Gawler and do impact everyone in this room if they do reside there. So I don't want that opportunity to be lost, because if we're not to go through this process, I think it'd be a long time before another developer would come along and pick up that bucket and continue the challenge. So I just wanted to share that with the members that may have been missed in the emotive speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben Fitzsimons. Justin, now it's your turn. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors and the council administration team. Once again, I'm appreciative of your availability for a special meeting on this issue. I also extend my gratitude to the journalist Friend Bunyip. You've been instrumental in keeping the Gawler community informed about this issue. You've helped make sure that the first time the Gawler community knew about this wasn't when roadworks started on Main North Road. As you know, this is my 5th address to council on this topic, and my stance remains unchanged. I am wholeheartedly against the proposed development and rezoning of this land in this way. While I have much to say about the so-called merits of this code amendment, I'm going to reserve those comments until we go through that consultation process, which is upcoming, because that's the appropriate platform to do that. Tonight, though, I'd like to draw your attention to attachment 9, which outlines the proposed consultation process. I'm pleased to say that in general, I'm supportive of the plan that's been outlined. It has certain elements that warrant review, but in essence, it marks a significant improvement over the formal community consultation undertaken as part of this code development application. It's my strong view that the formal process failed to meet the expectations of the community charter in being genuine, fit for purpose, and transparent. The potential adverse impact of this development on residents extends far beyond the area initially identified by the formal process. So I commend you for broadening your zone of engagement. However, I believe there are key areas of the consultation process that require further attention. Firstly, we need safeguards to ensure that the feedback authentically represents the views of the local community, the very community from whom you are soliciting those views. I urge you to assign greater weight to the voices of local residents during the consultation process. We are, after all, the ones who will have to live with the impact of this development. And while I could simply hit Control-Z to undo errors in my speech, there's no undo button for a development of this magnitude. It's a very public, permanent monument to the decisions made over these coming weeks. Secondly, while the consultation area outlined in the document is more comprehensive than the one proposed by Future Urban, I believe it overlooks a key group of residents. Those living on the northern end of Gawler Terrace and the terrace really should be included, as any modifications to the arrangement of Sheriff Street and First Street are going to impact their local traffic movements and access to Adelaide Road. So in summary of my first point, in relation to the consultation process, I believe that the feedback process in principle was well conceived and superior to the formal process. I believe the views of local residents need to be prioritised, in your decision making over as we're going to be the ones who bear the brunt of this decision. And I believe that an expansion should be considered for that consultation area to incorporate that northern section of the terrace and Gawler Terrace. My second point, I'd like to address the officer's recommendation presented by the council administration. Again, I won't comment on the merits of the submission outlined in attachment 7 at this time, except to express that I don't believe that this submission is in line with community expectations. While it claims to meet a complicated checklist of requirements, a claim I dispute, it fails to address whether the development taking place in this specific location is really beneficial to the community at all. So regarding the recommendations being put forward to you tonight, I urge you to reconsider voting in favour of points 3 and points 4. The suggestion that you can, in principle, endorse this submission and the land management application sends a precarious message to the community. The document doesn't maintain neutrality. And
30
on
seconds.
matters,
Thank you, Justin.
and on matters where there is subjective interpretation, it consistently leans towards supporting the proposal. I don't think that claiming this submission has in principle support from this chamber passes the pub test. Thank you.
John Hockley. Thank you, John.
Good evening, Mayor, council members and the gallery. My name is John Hockley and I'm a resident of Evanston Park. I would like to firstly acknowledge the council for listening to our local community and residents' opinions and disapproval of the rezoning proposal of 550 to 554 Maynorth Road. In general, I would like to summarise what we have been expressing here tonight and in previous meetings. We as a community of Gawler are the ones who shop, sell and buy locally, support local small business and use our infrastructure. We are the ones whose families grow and thrive in Gawler. We support our families, friends and neighbours through small businesses who give back to our community with volunteers and community events. The previous consultation initiated by the proponents has been very vague and has not reached out to Gawler as a community. It was within a small meterage surrounding area to the proposed site. And the feedback statistic given was not truly proportionate, as we as a community received petition numbers that are opposed to the rezoning that totaled 462 signatures, yet they were only counted as one submission, therefore only showing 117 opposed compared to only 51 supporting it. So at least 578 people are against the rezoning. This is over 90% of the total submissions, which would obviously change the numbers dramatically. So we commend the Gawler Council initiating a public consultation that will be more transparent and a wider demographic to give a realistic community opinion. The local community's opinion should hold more weight than the technical process and the just ticking boxes to fulfil the minimum requirements of the rezoning process. Although it may be technically compliant, once the overshadowing has been rectified, these structures are not suitable for this area, along with the possible closing of Sheriff's Road, extra traffic lights on Maynorth Road, and taking land from the Jockey Club to widen lanes, as well as taking away from Gawler's heritage and welcoming environment. This rezoning is not in our community's best interest, nor will it make our town a better place to live or bring us together. It is solely to profit through monetary values and not to benefit Gawler as a community. Gawler is a town you want to live in and to commute from. The Gawler community is united. From previous meetings, deputations, petitions, and the future outcome of public consultations will only strengthen and display the disapproval to this rezoning. We have full faith in our elected council members who we entrust with our best interests and believe that you will listen to our disapproval throughout this public consultation and previous meetings to this development and will do the right thing by Gawler's community. I look forward to seeing the outcome in the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Shirley.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to focus on three aspects: traffic, cost to ratepayers and zoning. First of all, traffic. It's clear that traffic on the historic streets of Gawler South and the surrounds will intensify immensely if you allow the site to be developed and rezoned. Councillor Koch and the Phillips Avenue Group were outraged when the Gawler East Link Road joined Carlton Road. They believed there'd be rat running down Phillips Avenue. Your independent assessors said that wouldn't happen. Councillor Koch and his group also complained when the service station went up and said there'll be light and noise problems, pollution. Your assessment, your independent assessment said that wouldn't be the case. Even though your assessment said to ignore that, you invested in changing that roundabout and in putting extra plantings as a buffer because you wanted to protect that area. You listened to Councillor Koch. These people are screaming at you about their concerns about traffic through historic Gawler South. Cost to ratepayers. If you read the officer's report on the very last page, it makes it clear that when the trigger is pulled, if this development goes ahead, you are committed to hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, in road, stormwater, paving, etc. It gives the pricing around about 50%. Where's that money coming from? This council's budget is already on life support. The only way you can find that money when that trigger is pulled is you have to pull things away from your existing list of priorities, or you have to go even further into debt. You will be committed to a massive amount of money that should be spent on your backlog of other projects. And finally, zoning. This council defends zoning immensely. And zoning gives protection to those people who are investing: commercial, retail, residential. And because of the zoning, people invest with confidence. We've just seen the 2 blocks of land, the tennis courts, sold on Church Hill. That area is zoned historic. Can you imagine if that developer came to you, like this developer is, and saying, we would like to build a nursing home or a child centre or something on that zone? This council would kill that off. You would not be entertaining, well, let's go to community consultation. Because the danger of that would be that the mass of the community might say that's not a bad idea. And the people of Churchill would hate that. So you would fiercely defend, as you should, the zoning on that area as historic residential. When this council took over the zone from Manapara, there was a perfectly good commercial zone. And if you remember, in the time, the ideologically driven council at the time said, we want to put that back into the rural zone. And what you've done since then is you've restricted any development in that area. In fact, when the Eckerman nursery site then became a hire tool, when that reverted, that land there was cleared and reverted to rural zone, which is along your current zoning. Then comes Peter Kittle and says, I would like to use that commercially. This council has the power to drive the zoning, and you did, you changed it. Now, Mr. Fitzsimmons says there are not any decent places. This is totally wrong. That zone, that Peter Kittle site, that whole area, you could, if you wanted to, you could rezone that as commercial, and you could allow the sort of site that may go on the Vidula site to go there. But you have an absolute obligation to protect the rights of these people who bought into that area as a residential zone. Now, the only reason that Vidula's site grew, as Mr. Fitzsimmons said, it started as a backyard nursery in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Vidula's. And this council allowed it to grow into what it is today. And it is much loved, but it grew against your own rules. It's a residential zone. So it is not justification to say, well, because it's there, we must therefore make the whole area open to commercial. No, you have an obligation, like you have done in the other zone, to defend that area. And the people in that area, they're screaming at you about the
30
concerns of
seconds,
traffic.
thank you.
They're concerned about the impact on their lifestyle and the impact on their investment. Tonight, councillors, if you let this go out and it goes to public consultation, it's a done deal. I'll predict that right now. If this goes out tonight for consultation, all these people will get is a bit of tweaking. That's all they'll get. It'll be a done deal. You need to stick to your guns, protect your zone, and protect this as a residential zone. That's what these people are demanding.
Thank you.
And you, as their
Thank you,
elected
Andrew.
members, need to say that to the
5 minutes
administration.
is up. Thank you. Adrian Shackley. Adrian Shackley, thank you.
Yes, thanks, mayors, councillors, staff and community. I'm speaking on behalf of Gawler Environment and Heritage Association, which made quite a detailed submission to the proponents. I take it councillors haven't actually seen those submissions at this stage. You have? Okay. Anyway, so I want to just elaborate a few things. I mean, the big issue for council is in planning terms, and it's not a council decision, I understand that, it's going to the minister eventually. But is this a suitable place for the proposed planning change and development? That's the question at the end of the day. Now, I know all you're doing tonight is deciding to put a document out for public consultation.
That's right.
And could I say, it is not appropriate that a document go out that expresses support one way or another for the position that's in that document. So council needs to change the proposed resolution to make sure it's not taking a position in relation to what's being put forward by your staff. I mean, you know, to be fair to the community, you need to be waiting until you hear community views before taking a position on anything. So, you know, the current zoning wouldn't work for this development. So you change the zoning and that somehow makes it appropriate in this area. Think about that. The public report that's come back in relation to public consultation doesn't really deal with the issues seriously about gateway and vistas and entry and exit from the old part of Gawler. This Sheriff Street was actually the boundary of the Gawler South Council for many years, from 1899, 1933, and then Gawler Council up to 1985 when the Evanston Park area was adopted. So it's a serious boundary. It's not just a perception that it's an entry into the old part of Gawler. It was that for, you know, the best part of 100 years set out. And go and have a look from the racecourse of the vista across the foothills from that open space area. It's fantastic. The last thing you want to do is mess that up. You know, it's one of the few vistas in the town where you can see out onto that eastern foothills and get a really nice view of a whole lot of, you know, images. And equally leaving town. I mean, who wants a 100-metre long, 2.4 metre wide high fence on Sheriff Street as you leave town? Secondly, looking at employment land, I mean, I'm really not happy with the way that issue's been presented. I mean, why is it that employment land needs to be on an arterial road? Where does the planning system say that the car is the only way you get to employment places? And what about the train? And we've got a lot of land in that Evanston Gardens area currently zoned within the town development for Gawler. It's zoned residential at the moment, so is this. I mean, is potential for land in that area to be repurposed for employment, if that's what council and the community and the state government want. There's a big area in there and it's near the train line. So that's worth looking at. I mean, the stuff that's in the council officers report about all the land in the rural zone and down next to Playford, I mean, what a red herring is that? Saying, oh, that's not suitable. Well, of course it's not. Nobody would be supporting that. But within the footprint of what's currently set up for development, that's a possibility. That's well worth looking at. You know, arterial roads. I mean, how did Springwood Commercial Centre get developed if you have to be on an arterial road? And broadly, I mean, the report from our officers struggles to find any criticism of this
30 seconds.
proposal
Thank you.
in
Adrian.
relation to the community plan. Well, I invite you to have a look at section 1.1.2, 1.3.6, 2.2 and 2.2.1 and 2 to talk where it talks about character of the town, local character, etc. that's where this proposal is going to run into trouble. It doesn't fit that sort of analysis, and it's not dealt with properly in the report. So I think I'll leave it at that, because I know we're going to get another set of commentaries coming back. But I mean, the task for council tonight is to make sure you don't put your foot in it by saying, yep, we're pretty happy with
Yep.
this.
Thank you, thank
Thank
you,
you.
thank you, Mr Chaplin. Okay, that concludes the deputations. Are there any declarations of interest, councillors? There be none. So now we move to any questions for the deputies? Thank you. If somebody could turn the microphone off. Actually, I can. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we move to what we're going to do with this officer's recommendation. I'm going to take out point 4 and do that as a separate matter. So that will be a separate matter. One moment. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I'll take out point 4 and then we'll come back to the motion. First of all, before I go to that, Councillor Hennessy, Andrew Goodsell is going to give a presentation. Andrew, you have 10 minutes, so I'll leave you to do that. Thank you. Are you going up there? Okay.
Thank you.
Ladies, would you like to, if you could just say next slide, please, Andrew?
I think I'm cursed. I'll have to just.
Yeah,
hand up.
if you can just
Haven't
say
got-
next slide, please, and
Thank you.
ladies, can you progress?
Technology.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks for tonight. I'll be brief, obviously, given there's a number of things to discuss. Basically, we're going to talk about the decision options that are before council, some timelines. I should say up front that I've got our traffic engineer with us, plus I've got Chris Hannaford, our strategic planner, and I've also got Wendy and her team who have been involved with the stormwater assessment. So if there are problems or questions I can't answer, I may defer during the night. We'll talk about some of the issues that Future Urban have covered, and we'll talk about the engagement plan and next steps. Thank you. For those who can see this, and hopefully those who are behind me can see the slides on the wall, effectively there are 2 distinct pathways the council can go with the decision tonight. Ultimately, if we're all in an agreement, there would be support for the submission, support for the LMA, and there would be an engagement process generally as foreshadowed in the engagement plan provided. In the event that does not happen, and there was agreement for the LMA, that's what we call pathway 1, the second column, which would be an engagement phase or process whereby there may be a different submission, but it's certainly not the submission that I'm providing tonight. The other pathway, which is pathway 2, is where there's no support for either the LMA or the submission, which basically would suggest that there wouldn't be no engagement process whatsoever because there's nothing to engage upon. I would definitely strongly urge against pathway 2, given the minister has advised that council in good faith should negotiate on infrastructure with the proponent, and it would be quite contradictory and inappropriate, I would argue, in terms of infrastructure for council to basically say it doesn't want to deal with infrastructure. Next slide. I won't go through the timeline because I think you know it. I've only got 10 minutes. Next slide. I'll go through this slide briefly. It's fair to say that there were a number of submissions that were raised by the community, and those submissions that council received were generally similar to the ones that Future Urban received, because clearly they went to both parties. The 4 biggest issues really were congestion and traffic lights. We'll call them rat runs, but you can call them other names.
noise impacts and visual and build height. Yes, there are other submissions or other issues, but they were the four key ones, I would argue. Moving forward, next slide. This were some of the suggested changes by the proponent. We've already talked about the reduction in building height. We've talked about additional landscaping. One of the concerns that was raised was about acoustic fences on boundaries. That's now been set back from that boundary by 3 metres. There are tree plantings of 6 metres minimum height at maturity within that landscaped area. It's fair to say it's a different proposal in a large number of ways from what was first envisaged. However, notwithstanding, it's still a bulky goods development. We accept that. In terms of stormwater and flooding, the two big issues are about stormwater impacts from the development and about flooding. They are two, however, separate, distinct issues. There's no concern from a council administrative point of view on stormwater impacts in terms of on-site detention, so I'll put that to one side. There's no debate that the development can't achieve that outcome, which then brings it to the bigger issue, which is flooding. So regardless of those in the room who suggest that council can't afford to do stormwater mitigation and flood protection within the zone, these are things which need to be done by council in any event. And these are things which should be done realistically over the next 3, 5 to 10 years. What happens with the proposed development is there's money to actually facilitate bringing that forward. And that's something which is talked about in the submission and in the agenda report. And I think that there are steps being delivered at the moment via the LMA, which deal with pipe infrastructure under the road. But the bigger issue is about detailed design for detention on the racecourse site, which hasn't been done, which needs to be done. So council have already discussed that flooding strategy, and this actually brings us towards achieving that strategy. Thank you. I've already talked about the specifics of that. So it's $520,000, which has been agreed to at this point in time, of which $30,000 for design documentation, $190,000 for the underground works, which is the area in yellow underneath the road, upsizing the pipe infrastructure. But the majority of it is money being spent on detailed design for detention within the racecourse site. And I know the racecourse, who may be hidden, I don't know, have always had some interest, as you would, in terms of what a proper detention system would look like that may or may not affect them. And it's appropriate that council resource that work. Next slide. On transport, there are two issues really, and you can accuse me of being a planner, but that's where the shoe fits. And basically, there are traffic congestion questions, which are about the role of Main North Road, and there are issues about local traffic behaviour on side roads. I think our general view has been summarised already today, which is that the modelling from the proponents, the modelling that we commissioned through Stantec, and the work from DIT basically says that the arterial road can function as an arterial road. Yes, it has 20-something thousand vehicles a day. Is it busy? Yes, it reasonably is. That's its role. The issues of detailed design for how lights are delivered, how turning movements occur, that's all part of the next stage that DIT has said is part of the DA. So we really can't venture down that track other than to say that the work that's been done indicates it can be accommodated. The issue that council staff had concerns with was movement of vehicles, particularly left out onto Main North Road. It's probably fair to say we did push the proponent further than they would comfortably have liked to have gone. However, that junction is an existing, we'd say, suboptimal junction. And if there are questions tonight, I'm sure Richard can answer them, but that junction needs to be improved. This proposal allows us to do that. Next slide, please. Basically, this simply confirms what I said before, about 21,400 vehicles per day use Main North Road. It drops off considerably on local roads. The game we would suggest in terms of traffic management is to carefully manage what happens on Main North Road and to leave local roads as residential streets. Next slide. I think I've already covered this. DIT basically said they agree with the work that's been done. There's more work to be done. It's fair to say there has been some backwards and forwards with DIT about whether the lights should be on the corner of Sheriff Street. We don't believe they should be. We believe they should be in the mid-block where it was advertised. We don't wish to see lights facilitating movement of vehicles down Sheriff. And that's basically what their second lot of advice on the 28th of April basically says. Next. This brings us on to traffic improvements in terms of the junction, which I just talked about. We've basically suggested there are three options. From closure completely through to a left in only, through to a realignment and a left out. They've all been costed, but effectively we've talked about in the LMA a 50% contribution from the developer. And that significantly advances our ability to improve a deficient junction as it sits today. And these are basically slides showing those changes. And I do apologise, I'm running through this relatively fast, but I think we need to. Okay, as I've already said, option 1 is our preferred solution, and that is what's in the LMA. And there's fors and against, and clearly there's a need for engagement to occur. And whilst there are some who may say we should go to the community with a blank canvas and ask their position before we engage, I think the criticism's also been on the other foot, which is the community expects us to give a position and then to test that with the community. And that's the way, as staff, we have presented our report. Next slide. There are other things that need to be addressed as well as part of the development. There's basically reconstruction of Sheriff Street, footpath provision along that road. There's really no drainage or guttering on that side of the road. And there's also questions about landscape treatments. There's some trees in some areas. There are no trees in other areas. There's a need for a fair amount of work to be done. We estimate that to be in the order of $165,000 to $170,000. And that's also reflected in the LMA. There are other items which are the cost of the proponent, traffic lights on Main North Road, footpath on Main North Road, negotiation on the fencing with the Gawler Barossa Jockey Club. These are dealt with as principles in the LMA, which are, these are responsibilities of the proponent. They are not council responsibilities. And that's just a section showing how we would achieve the treatment on Sheriff Street, which we can deal with later if we wish. Next slide. Okay, on to acoustic assessment. So it's quite obvious that there are 3 sensitive interfaces, Ames Drive, Coleman and Sheriff. Sheriff is probably the least impacted in the sense that it has a road that separates it from the nearest sensitive uses. Council commissioned an acoustic report to peer review. The biggest issue that comes out of that really is the need for enclosing the loading bay, which is part of the LMA. And I think that substantially addresses a lot of the concerns about noise impacts from the loading and unloading of vehicles. So for those who think we haven't been seriously listening to the community, I would agree to disagree. Next slide. The issue of coexistence with other uses, residential and bulky goods, we've done some case studies in a few different areas. This slide deals with one of them, which is the Bunnings, sorry, this is the Gawler Gateway site. We looked at the Bunnings Modbury site as well. That's in the submission. I won't go into more detail other than to say that these uses do coexist, and there are ways of managing that through hours of operation, the design of acoustic walls, a number of different treatments, including the enclosure of the loading bay, which we've talked about already. So I'm going to be croaky. Next slide, trees. We did a peer review on trees. The LMA identifies 8 trees to be retained. In reality, all significant and regulated trees are protected under the Act. However, we think these trees warrant further protection through the LMA. So I'll just leave that at the moment, other than to say we've made significant effort to retain trees along Main North Road. Next. And those are where the trees are. Next slide was really about bulk and scale analysis. To get an idea of scale, the existing development of Gawler Green is around 13,500 square metres, which is relatively similar to what's proposed on the Bunnings site. Sorry, on the Suffolk site.
Keep going, Andrew. Keep going.
In any event, I think the question of scale is clear from that slide as to the degree of footprint. What we're showing here is the effect of 11.5 metre building height, and there's a before and after analysis which is shown in the submission, which shows the significant benefit of reducing the building height. Is the test that you can see a building from a residential property? Not really. It's really about whether there's a demonstrative impact on those neighbours. In our view, that those scale drawings show a significant improvement and one which can be managed. Next slide. This is that shadowing. We've actually looked at the standards which apply to overshadowing of building private open space and living space areas. It does meet code requirements.
For those who wish to just debate that, I'm happy to sit down and go through those code provisions, but it does meet the standards. Next slide. And we've talked before about the amended concept design. I think it's quite clear what the changes are. We've already covered those. Next slide. There's been some debate about land supply. I think it's quite clear that there aren't very few employment zoned parcels of land in Gawler. Yes, it's fair to say, as some people do, that, you know, can you find alternative sites for this development? We couldn't find any. There are certain locational requirements for this development, and I cannot see by the current zoning
Please
map
let Andrew speak.
how this can be done.
Please let Andrew speak. That's quite disrespectful when you don't let him speak. Keep going, Andrew.
Given that we have a shortage of supply, which I think we accept the modelling provided because it matches up with our analysis, we believe there is a shortage of employment zone land relative to residential land. We've got a fair bit of data to prove that. Moving to the next slide. We then looked at, this basically goes into the employment zones that exist. So they all have their challenges. Moving on to areas that aren't zoned, that could be zoned, we did look particularly along the arterial road, Main North Road, as to sites that could be zoned potentially. They all have their own constraints. Site 1 is Telstra. Site 2 is the Gateway Tourist Park, which is flood prone. And then you've got the renewal SA sites as well, which council has historically argued has been a gateway into the town, or in the case of the land on the northern end of those two areas, is already zoned for residential use. So, in terms of master plan enabled communities. So facilitating bulky goods development there will be challenging and problematic for a range of reasons. Next slide. This brings us to what we call Site 6, which is the subject land. And yes, it does have the requisite area. It does have a frontage which appears to be appropriate for the use. There's a history of use. You could argue about how that use ended up being as substantial as it is, but that's not the point. It has existing use rights, and the development that's there today is an established commercial use. There are similar commercial uses along that same road within 100 to 200 metres. There is a mix of uses on that road. Then basically from there, we've, as I said, there are specific constraints that need to be addressed. We've already covered stormwater drainage and the Sheriff Street junction. Next slide. And then we've gone to the engagement plan. I won't go into detail on that because you can see what it says. We proposed 2 engagement sessions. Now, clearly, there'll be opportunity for people to express their view in favour or against on the LMA as well. And there'll be the usual engagement processes via social media. Next. In overview, the general suitability of the affected area to accommodate the use. The conclusion is that it is consistent with council's expectations that site could be developed. I think the LMA is a critical aspect in terms of managing the impact. In terms of independent peer reviews, we've never asked any of the peer review consultants to support automatically the proposed development. That's clearly inappropriate. They were given a brief, they were asked to critique whether it met industry standards, and the answer was in each case, yes. There were some improvements, however, as we've gone through. In terms of the issue of the LMA and mitigation measures, yes, we have pushed the developer beyond what was initially envisaged, but we think that makes it a better proposal. Next. And I think the history of the site is relevant, as is the shortfall employment zone land. That brings a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Any questions for Andrew, Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Mayor. Just quickly, Andrew, in reference to the land management agreement, for anyone who's looking at it, it's page 235 of the attachments. There's a section there on waiver. It's the waiver of compliance with any part of the land management agreement. So there's 2 questions here. When it says council has the power to waive that, is that referring to the elected body? And secondly, how would council prevent a development of the nature which has been precluded in the LMA? So, for example, a service station from occurring, given that council can't preclude a development application from going to the assessment panel?
Right, so the LMA goes with the land, so it's a civil matter. So if council were of the view, the administration, not the council, but the administration were of the view that there was a breach of the LMA, it would be within council's right to enforce the LMA.
So we could enforce the LMA.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just as a supplementary question to that. So my question was around the, obviously there's a clause in there which says that council can enforce the LMA. In terms of the waiver, is that an administration thing or is that a elected member thing? And also, of course, we know there's a legal case which involves Town of Gawler, Shrek v Town of Gawler in 2010, which clearly states that you can't stop a development application for taking place, even if an LMA says something contrary to that development application, because the application itself is not the development.
So we'll just go to Andrew, so you can respond to that, Andrew, if you'd like to turn your microphone on. Thank you.
I'm mindful of giving legal advice on the run, so I probably won't. And I won't compare where the legislation sits today to 2010 because it's a different act.
So the strength of an LMA,
Yeah.
I think the question sort of wraps around the strengths of LMAs, land management agreements. What's the strength of that LMA?
Well, it's significant and robust protection that council has, which has been used in the past. And basically the LMA you've got before you was the one that Kennedy Jones has drafted up, which to their advice to us is entirely enforceable. So if there's agreements there on what uses can and cannot occur, if there are matters there in terms of funding infrastructure or other matters, these are things council can and should enforce. There is a certain amount of legalese in commentary about variances and how that's applied. It's obviously a case-by-case assessment, but ultimately we would draft an LMA if we weren't going to attend to enforce it.
So with the land management agreement that's included in our papers, what's the total offset for the ratepayer?
Total offset, could you explain?
So the developer pays for stormwater, for
Yeah, sure.
other
Okay.
elements. So what's the overall cost?
Well, there's
The
500.
offset to
Yeah,
ratepayer.
There's $520,000 that's been put into flood mitigation.
Yeah.
There's something like $65,000 for road improvements.
Yeah.
There's reconstruction of Sheriff Street, which you could arguably say would be something council ultimately would need to do. And that's $165,000. So my rough arithmetic, we're up at $750,000 to $800,000. And that doesn't include what they're doing on Main North Road.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, councillor Kosh, you had a question?
Yes, yeah, through Mayor to
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
I'm just looking at the pathways here on page 7 of 46. And it says there in red, don't support the code amendment. And then we go down. If we didn't support the code amendment, what would we be taking to the community consultation?
It's flashing. Now it's working. Yep. Yeah. So if council didn't support the submission, but did support the LMA, is that where we're going? I think if that were to be the case, you could argue that council may need to go and get another submission by a planning consultant that has a different view from the administration, which would entail a significant cost and time constraint, because clearly that's not the position we have.
Okay, right. Council will make up their own mind.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, any other questions for Andrew? You may take your seat, Andrew. Thank you very much for that presentation. Okay, so Councillor Hennessy, you had your hand up previously.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the suggestion of splitting the code amendment and the LMA part,
Yes.
because I think that is going to be very important. I think the LMA and the information it contains is going to be important regardless of what the future decision on the site will be. So my I'm going to amend the
So you're going to put up an alternative motion.
alternative, thank you, and I have emailed it to the governance.
I haven't seen it.
It's
Okay.
on the screen now. Oh, no, it's not quite. No,
No.
it's about to be, just a sec, it's gone through, I'm sure.
Oh, right.
There we go.
Okay, attachment 7. there.
So I am
I'm going to read this out.
Thank you.
Receives the, this is an alternative motion, receives the Virtulis Code Amendment report and the submission as set out in attachment 7 that has been provided for the purpose of community consultation for a period of no less than 3 weeks. 2, undertakes community and stakeholder engagement on the code amendment for 550 to 554 Main North Road, Evanston Park, in accordance with attachment 9. Be provided a further report upon completion of the engagement process. Now, does everyone understand?
Okay,
Would you like to speak? to the
thank
motion?
you. I also have some problems with endorsing in principle. I think it is sufficient that we receive the reports, and I actually would like to thank the staff for the reports and acknowledge that they've given us a position paper to test with the community, and that they've put significant workload and a tight deadline into producing that. So to try and shorten, I've actually just used the first one to both receive the overall report and the submission in attachment 7.
I'm just going to make some clarifying
Sure.
comments before, sorry to interrupt. So attachment 7 is the draft council submission to future urban on Evanston Park Code Amendment. Attachment 9, which is point 2, is the Town of Gawler engagement plan, just so we're clear, which is detailed in the attachments. Thank you.
Right, I think that's, yep. I'm happy if we need to wordsmith that to make it slightly clearer. Councillor Koch, happy to do that. But what I'm moving away from, I'm first of all just saying, let's deal with the submission. Let's send that out to the community so they can read through it as a position paper and come back to us with information. And I also want to endorse at this point the community and stakeholder engagement plan that's been given to us. I'm confident that we'll receive plenty of feedback from the community through that process. I also have some concerns. I've been contacted by so many people, I'm losing count with some of the things that, some of the points in the report, but I acknowledge it's a position paper for which we can move forward and receive community feedback. Several of my points have been raised by the excellent deputations tonight. I won't repeat them. I think that's not the point of tonight's meeting. I think what we need to do is just allow these documents to go out and the community engagement process to occur over the next 3 weeks. I think that's the point of tonight's meeting. So that is my alternate wording.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Davies, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to support this version of the motion. It's in function identical to the last one, but in symbolism, I think receiving it rather than endorsing it sort of has a bit of a different meaning in regards to having a position before we go out for community consultation. So yeah, firstly, thanks to everyone who's come out and presented. I know it's a tough thing to do. As was said during the deputations, it's like learning another language, looking through a lot of these planning reports and things. Plus you have to do public speaking, which is, one of humanity's greatest fears. So it really is something that's, it's a major thing to do. And look, I have some, similar, agree with some parts of the report, not sure about some of the other parts, but that's what the community consultation process is for. It will go out and everyone will have the chance to go through it. I think everyone has done their part in the process. The proponents, their job is to work within the state government's code amendment system, and they've done that. The job of the staff is to provide expert advice to councillors, and have done that through both internal and independent advice. And now the job of the elected members is to take that expert advice and filter it through the perspective of community members. And that's what we're here to do by sending this out for consultation and then making a final decision after the consultation comes back. So I'm seconding the motion.
Discussion. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to start by acknowledging everyone who came out to speak tonight. I think the deputations were very, in large part, very well put, and through this entire process have been very respectful in a large part. I think I take what was said about the way that the proponents have acted during this process, and that all the rules were followed, and I think that in large part that is true, that they have followed the rules, and that in large part we're compliant with all of that. And there is a lot of factors which come into this which are about compliance, but that's not why we're here tonight. We're not here to talk about compliance. This consultation is about the merit of the proposal. And I think that putting this out in this way without supporting anything in principle first is a good way of gauging the merit of this concept in an authentic way. I think throughout this process, everyone who's come and spoken, everyone who's gathered to talk about this around the proposed area, everyone who's been involved in speaking out about this and signing petitions and talking to the Bunyip has been very respectful and has shown that they are intelligent and compassionate people, that they do know what they're talking about and they are well informed. And I think it's our duty as elected members to leverage that in making our final submission. I think that this motion is the way forward because that means we are able to leverage that. It's not a tick or flick thing. It's not a, do you agree with it or not? I think that this does open it up so that we can start to leverage some of those expertise we have within the community. We've heard people talk tonight about their experience with heritage, environment, and and we've heard previously people talk about issues around community health, livability, what it means to them and their families to be in that area. And I think to ignore that would be to do a great injustice to this entire process. So while I'm not glad that we have to be at this stage, I'm glad that we got here to this point where council is taking a stand and making a submission on this. And I would just like to thank everyone for acting maturely and respectfully up until this stage. And I hope that we can get a report which comes back, which is reflective of all those things which the community has brought not only tonight, but throughout this entire process to council, and that we do our jobs as representatives. And to close, just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should.
Any other discussion? Councillor Kosh, you've got your hand up?
Yes, I've just got a question, I
Yes.
suppose, for Andrew.
Yes.
Ultimately, if council decides not to approve, not to support this development, what's the impact on the LMA? And I suppose the scenario is that the minister will decide. At the end of the day, it's not our decision, it's the minister's. I mean, we have to reflect the community's views,
That's right.
but it's the minister will decide at the end of the day. So if we, as a council, say we don't think it's a good idea, what's the effect of the?
Well, I'm
the LMA?
going to answer that. The land management agreement, when anyone, be it a proponent, be it whoever, does a code amendment and then develops a particular piece of land, if you don't have a land management agreement, or if there's a role for a land management agreement, and that's why I asked Andrew the total cost of that, which is upwards of $800,000. And that's what the developer pays. And if you don't have that land management agreement, and we do not know what the minister's going to do. I don't know anyone who can predict the future. No one can. No one can. So we don't know what the minister will do. The minister will make his decision in due course, and he may approve or he may not approve. Regardless, if it goes back and there's a residential development, you will still need a land management agreement on that land, because it's quite a large piece of land. So any developer that develops that land gets a significant uplift. Now, that's the right of the developer to make money. Absolutely, I don't think anyone disagrees with that. However, they do have a moral responsibility to contribute to the community. And in this land management agreement, it's upwards of $800,000. So that offsets the cost for the ratepayer. And so I think that that's why I've taken the land management agreement out, because I think it's a separate, it's an important question that we need to consider separately. That's why I've taken it out. Yeah.
I just want to be clear in my mind that if we as a council decide we don't support this,
Yeah.
are we dealing ourselves out of the game? Are we actually saying, well, we don't want anything involved with it? You're going to talk to the minister and the developers, the minister says,
Yeah.
yes, I want to approve it. Will they only talk to the developers and they just forget about us because we've dealt ourselves out of the game?
I think we can't predict the future, like I said. We don't know what the minister's going to do. No one does. No one can predict the future. No one can. So unless you've got a crystal ball, and I don't believe in crystal balls. So I think that land management agreements allows councils to put requirements on the development of land. Now, if the minister disapproves or does not approve it, well, the land management agreement is sort of null and void and you go back to square one. However, if he does approve it and we don't have a land management agreement, that the developers who are sitting right in front of us now get off scot-free. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right. I think that, you know, that's why I've taken it out. And that's why I think it is a separate issue. You know, you can disagree with the code amendment, but you should still safeguard the interests of council and the ratepayer, because bear in mind, the word council is ratepayers. And so I think that there's a separation there, that you can still support a land management agreement and safeguard the interests of council and the ratepayer. And you don't necessarily have to support the code amendment. I think that's perfectly okay.
I'm not actually 100% sure, because I know there was other developments where council didn't support code amendments, and we got dealt out of this. We got dealt out of it, and the minister made a decision, and we weren't involved in the long-term land management, the agreements on infrastructure, etc. I'm just concerned. I just want to be clear that if the council just decides that it doesn't want to support this code amendment, it's still at the table negotiating and still can get the land management agreement, because I don't know whether that's, we've had experience where that hasn't happened, where we've been left out of the whole system, and the council has suffered, and we're playing catch-up footy now, trying to get infrastructure down the track. I'm just that's my question.
Andrew?
It's certainly the case that the minister said that in considering the code amendment, he would expect to see an LMA negotiating in good faith between council and the proponent. The hypothetical, which is what you're raising, which is you go through an engagement process of 3 weeks and come to a conclusion you don't support the submission, does that impact the LMA in terms of whether the proponent wants to table an LMA which they've negotiated in good faith with us? I can't speak for the proponent.
No. Thank you, Andrew, for that comment. Okay, right. Any other discussion? Yes, Councillor Lorna.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Hennessy, for making the amendments to the motion there. I, for one, will be supporting this. However, I wasn't in favour of endorsing anything in principle, what was stated there. Staff have provided the scope of the report pretty well, done a very good job of that. There was a lot of reading, lots of words. They were provided at what they were asked is, and that is, could the code amendment be viable? In short, well, yes, it could. Pretty much, if enough money is at stake, anything can be viable. There are many points that make it viable: employment, infrastructure, upgrades paid by the developer, etc. We are here tonight to ask the question of the community. should the code amendment go forward from the engagement with residents at this particular time is a resounding big fat no, as so it shows in the reports. We need the community to get involved, make the submissions, provide the council with the knowledge of the majority, allowing the town board to submit its response in a non-biased manner. We have been provided with the answers to could. Now we need the answers to should. Thank you.
Are you wanting to speak? Okay, thank you. Councillor Koch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Actually, I want to thank Councillor Hennessy for this. On balance now, I will support this. I think the developers have gone through a process. They've answered a lot of the concerns that the community have. There's been a lot of peer reviews, et cetera, et cetera. I think they've come to the table. And I think the report reflects that. It does reflect that. I was concerned that we would not be moving forward with that report. And I think that would have been a grave problem. But at the moment, I think this is, if it's viewed as a report, it's almost a neutral report, which I think is fine. And I think that then allows us to go out to the community, and the community can look at the new scenario that's an offer, because previously it was a different scenario. This is a new scenario. So, and it's a wider catchment area that will be consulted. So on balance, I'm happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor. We go.
Thank you, Mayor. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge everyone that's come out to speak tonight on both sides of this. I know it's not an easy task, but hearing you speak is very useful for the decision makers of the room. Which I think that's a very important message to really drill into the decision makers of the room. We're the ones that are going to be lumped with the decision, right or wrongly, and us as the elected body need to ensure that we're thinking holistically on the town. I'm a little bit worried that the employment zone shortage is being used as a leverage point, because by that admission, we've got one block left and that's it. We're done. I think we need to unpack that. I think we need to look very closely at what that looks like moving forward, but that's a discussion for another day. I'm thankful for Councillor Hennessy for moving the motion the way she has. As a ratepayer, I have opinions of the holistic approach. I acknowledge the concerns of the ratepayers in the area, but I also try to think of the bigger picture thing, and what I'm going to need from my community is to keep that strong voice going and be able to, I guess, help us capture that sentiment moving forward. So I'm happy to support the motion the way that it sits. I'm happy to go out for another round of community consultation. I thank staff for their professional advice. And as Councillor Lorna touched on, the answer of could it happen has been answered. The answer, should it happen, is something we really now need to unpack. And I couldn't have summed it up better myself. So I thank Councillor Lorna for making that point. So yeah, moving forward, I look forward to seeing what comes back in 3 weeks' time, and yeah, trying to get that decision for us as the decision makers of this town.
Any other discussion? If not, Councillor Hennessy, you can wrap up the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my elected members for their words. I think that we've summarised it. I think we're to a point now, as I say, that we have information that we can send out to the community. I encourage and I look forward to hearing from that, so that we are even better informed about the decision that we're going to have to make towards the end of June, I think timetable is. So I look forward to your support of the motion. Thank you.
Debate is closed. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll deal with point a separate motion. The council, Councillor Hennessy.
I've sent through the second one, so the split, and hopefully that will come to the governance officer as we speak.
So I need to see the words before it goes to governance.
Oh, sorry, my
Yes.
apologies.
Yes.
Okay, I will happy to send that to you. That's my error.
What does it say? I can't even see it.
Right. It's that we receive, this time we're going to receive the land management agreement associated with 550 to 554 Main North Road. That includes the infrastructure obligations and funding principles as set out in attachment 8. That's been provided for the purpose of community consultation for a period of no less than 3 weeks. So it's the remaining part of the previous motion, the original motion. 2 is that we will again undertake community stakeholder on the, for the code amendment.
No, we've already done that.
Okay, well, we certainly have to pass the fact that we need,
So we've already done that.
so we can take 2 out, do you think?
I think so, because
Okay.
we've already endorsed. If you,
Yep.
just scroll up a minute, ladies. Excuse me, councillor Hennessy, undertakes, so if you see point 2, undertakes community and stakeholder engagement in accordance with attachment 9, that's identical to what you've got in there.
Fine.
So
Then-
I think we've covered that.
Okay, so we can take, and we need to understand the report to do with the land management engagement. Yep, I'm happy with that amended
Yeah.
word. Thank you for your help in wordsmithing.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So you want to move that? Okay. Do you want to speak to it?
No, I think, hopefully that is fairly straightforward. It's bringing the other part, as councillor Koch said, the land, and yourself, Mayor, the land management agreement is a vital part of this process, and I think we need to keep that going as well. They're distinct, but it will become, I suspect, a very important part, whatever decision of the minister is going to be. So I ask for your support of this motion.
Do I have a seconder, councillor White?
Thanks, Mayor Redmond. Yes, thank you, councillor Hennessy, for moving this amended motion. I agree that it's not appropriate to, in principle, support something for community consultation when it hasn't gone out to the community yet. However, I also understand that the land management agreement is a vital tool, in particular for the residents and community members of the affected area. Allowing the LMA to go out to community consultation will ensure that their voice is heard for the LMA in case of the development being approved and the rezoning going ahead. I think we need to make sure we keep all options open so that if the planning minister does approve this code amendment and the land is rezoned, the community have had their say on the land management agreement to ensure, as the mayor has said, our community is able to get a contribution from the developer if that was to proceed in that scenario. So happy to second this motion. And I'd just like to echo everyone's thanks to council staff, the proponents, Future Urban, for being here tonight, and most importantly, the community and residents of the affected area. I think my fellow elected members have said this, but I think the robust debate and the presentations you have all presented to council over many months have been absolutely fantastic and vital for us as decision makers and your elected representatives. So thank you, and very happy to second
So-
this motion.
Just on that, we've added and to be released. I think that fits with the intent of the motion. So I'm just asking the mover and seconder if you're happy with those 1, 2, 3, 4 words. Okay, thank you. Councillor White? We're releasing it. Okay, so I think that just covers off on that. Okay. Yes, councillor Solomon?
Just quickly, in reference to the question that I asked before, I just wanted to reinforce that I think it would be good to check the enforceability of that particular element of the LMA, just to make sure that we're completely sound. Just because, I mean, I think we have a good idea about what a hypothetical development application might be for now, but it has been said that it won't be certain things, and I just want to make sure that that is actually an enforceable part of the LMA, and that doesn't run into any issues down the line. So I would just make that suggestion, put that out there for staff. But on the whole, the land management agreement is a necessary part of this, especially if the minister has requested it, especially if this doesn't, if the application were to go ahead, it would be a necessary part, and it would be a lot better than the alternative, So I'm happy to support this motion.
Any other discussion? You've already spoken. You've got a question about what? Thank you. If you'd like to ask your question.
Thanks, Mayor. In regards to the motion, do we need to include the purpose of community consultation in reference to attachment 9, as we did with the previous motion?
No.
Or is it
no,
implied?
No, that's that, we've got a resolution that states that, so we don't need to repeat that. This is all about the land management agreement. Councillor Davies? No, I know, but I was talking to Councillor White. I was actually talking to Councillor White, not you. I am now talking to you. Do you wish to speak? Thank you.
Yeah, look, I mean, I won't reiterate most of it because it's the same as the last one, but just saying the land management agreement, obviously, very important. We are a stakeholder in the list of submissions that the planning minister, Mr. Champion, will get, but we're not the only or deciding one necessarily. They'll have their own independent advice. If that comes back with the same independent advice that we've gotten, for example, and says, yep, it's all above board, that could be a, major factor in the decision-making of the minister. So, we can't just assume that we are the ones who are, because we have no say beyond telling the minister what the community thinks. So we do also need to have this land management agreement in place to make sure that if it does happen, we'll be able to mitigate any issues that occur.
Thank you very much for that. And I'd also like to thank everyone for their presentations. I'd like to also thank the respectful behaviours that have been displayed. I think that really goes a long way when people are presenting, and that includes the developers, equity, and a fair approach. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's spoken tonight, including you, Leanne. It was your first time. Well done, you. Okay. Any other discussion? If not, Councillor Hennessy, are you happy for me to put the motion? The debate is now closed. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Carried unanimously. Thank you. So that concludes, really, I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you everyone for coming along at 8:41, ladies, 8:41. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you.